Hello, everyone. We'll give you a moment to connect to audio. Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1261st New Social Environment. I'm Joshua, a Programs Associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Dionne Lee and Marina Chao. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Dionne Lee is an artist working across various mediums such as photography, collage, and video. Her practice explores themes of power, survival, and personal history in relation to the American landscape. As she works with images, her acts of extracting, transforming, and reconfiguring them are aimed at developing new ways of seeing, as well as searching for meaning within abstraction. Our host today is Marina Chao, who is a curator at CPW in Kingston, New York. She has previously held curatorial positions at the International Center of Photography and the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. As assistant curator at ICP, she organized the exhibition Multiply, Identify Her in 2018 and contributed to the publication Public, Private, Secret on Photography and the Configuration of Self, published by Aperture and ICP in 2018. And with that, I'll turn over the mic to Marina.
Thank you so much, Joshua. Hi, everyone. My name is Marina Chao, and as Joshua mentioned, I'm a curator at CPW in Kingston. I'm a huge fan of your work, Dionne, and it's really an honor to be here with you today. So thank you. And thank you to the Brooklyn Rail for the invitation, to Chloe, Joshua, and Magley for putting this all together, and thank you to everybody here for joining us. So I'm gonna start just by trying to say, I've been trying, I've been saying this to Dionne too. Like when I think about how I can express to you all what I see in Dionne's work and what I love about her work and how she thinks is my mind is immediately racing. It's like a total jumble. And I kind of came to this epiphany when I was walking the dog that it's like, because this day I was like, looking at a bug and looking at the sky, but it's like considering an ant and considering the night sky. It's like something that's universal and profound, but visually, graphically, it's so elegant and like really exquisitely simple in a way. And so for me, there's something in there that's like I don't know, like a divine intelligence or ancient wisdom. And this word, the divine, and sort of the concept of spirituality is something that I want to come back to later. But and I should say by divine intelligence, I don't mean at all to like elevate you, Dionne, to some godlike position. No offense. I'm very impressed by you.
Oh, yeah.
But but I mean to say that there's an immediacy in your work that for me means that like the thing and the meaning of the thing are the same. And I think that's really like something that blows my mind. If I'm making any sense. But in any case, that's really what I love so much about your work, and it's quiet brilliance. Okay, so we're here to discuss your work and the way you think, and we're focusing on your first outdoor installation, between the falling leaf and the surface of the rock, which you see on your screen right now. And it's on view now at Storm King Art Center, which is, if you've never been, it's upstate, in New Windsor, and that's about, for me, 40 miles south of Kingston. So that we're all on the same page, and because we're using this as an entry point, this work, I'm going to start by describing the work and my experience of it to the best of my ability. And Dionne, jump in if there's something that you need to, if you want to say, fill in, and then we'll launch into questions and discussion. Okay, so this piece is really beautiful. You have to see it. It's up until November 10th if you can make it to Storm King. And as we'll get into, it has changed a lot already in the course of being up since May 7th when it opened. And you'll understand why as we talk about it. But the show is organized by Eric Booker, associate curator, who's fantastic and so smart. Hi, Eric, if you're out there. And with Adele Goldsmith, assistant curator, who I unfortunately don't know, but I'm certain is also
Awesome as
wonderful.
well. Yeah.
I, and again, catch the show before it closes. Okay, so you're at Storm King. It's beautiful. There are these sweeping vistas, and there's this large field called South Field. Um, you'll maybe know it from if you've been there. There's this monumental Mark DeSuvro sort of in the background. And then that's also where there's this Richard Serra work that's these steel plates sort of slicing into the land. And then in that context, you come to a small path. It takes you up to a clearing that has sort of this grouping of rocks of different size. So some of them are small enough for you to probably lift, and some of them you would probably have a hard time moving. These are rocks that Dionne found on the premises of Storm King, moved them there. And I mean, I thought something so beautiful about that experience coming up to it is that it's flat. Like everything, usually when you think of outdoor sculpture, especially and at Storm King, if you've been there, things kind of have to contend with the scale of the landscape. So they're generally quite large and impressive. And this is something that's just impressive in its quietness and it's flat. So you come and you're not immediately seeing it, especially when the grass has grown a bit and you come across these stones. Um, and they're purposefully arranged sort of together in these little convenings. And as the curators write in the text, they appear like a compass or a sundial in small groupings, clusters along this curved path. And if you see the work now, some rocks have a darker slate color, which is like, I don't know if you see a lot of the blue stone around. What the Andy Goldsworthy wall is made out of too, that it looks maybe a little like that. And then others are blotchy with iron orange patches on the lighter gray stone. And then if you look, you're looking closely at them, there are drawings on each one, abstract patterns, line drawings. They refer to the four cardinal directions, to nearby plants. There are depictions of dowsing rods. And the one has the outline of a palm set inside this web of delicate intersecting lines. And if you saw the work when the installation opened on May 7th, the rocks were this deep, deep blue-black color, which you see on the screen. Um, and that the rocks are technically, we're talking about photography here, are technically photographs, right, of the surrounding landscape. So what Dionne did was she covered the rocks in a photosensitive cyanotype layer um, of cyanotype chemical, and the layer registered what was exposed over the course of, and Dionne, you can correct me here,
A
originally the
day.
course of a day, right, from dawn to dusk.
Mm-hmm.
And then these photographs, the rocks as photographs, are also sort of registering time continuously in their own kind of dissolution, right? So why the rocks are changing is because it's as they're exposed to the sun, they're being the the photosensitive surface is being obliterated. And so what you're seeing little patches. And what I think you do really beautifully too is you're making these drawings, and some drawings kind of highlight natural elements of the stone, a crack or some kind of vegetation that's grown on it, some kind of moss or something. And as you're reading the pictures, you're just, because you're poised to look down and read them, as the cyanotype is fading, you're reading all kinds of things into every little crevice of the rock, right? That was existed there before, but now is all part of the it's all part of the like drawing that you've made in a way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Photograph, drawing, rock. Um, so I think yes, that is sort of the experience partially, and we'll talk about some of the other things that happen when you're in front of the work. But as I had it,
Yeah.
is there key things that I missed?
I really don't think so. I mean, I think the only thing I would add isn't necessarily maybe about the experience of being there or the work itself, but more just that me making this was a real like new thing because you said I've never done I've made like a couple of sculptural works before, but I've never done something to this scale. And I'm just really appreciative of Eric Booker for like seeing this sort of potential in my work and approaching me to do this project. because it's something that would have been impossible without any sort of support. And also, um, I think the most important thing I got from this was just the challenge it brought to my process and practice, and um, it was exciting.
Oh yes, so here you see the picture of it where it's really been quite,
Obliterated.
yeah. But you really do read every little thing. Like a bird could poop on it and be like, there's something happen, like everything becomes part of the composition, and which I think
They
is
do
so,
poop on it.
yeah.
They
I've really
do.
never read rock so closely. So, and then it becomes, it's almost like reading a poem. I mean, there is the poem on that one, but you really start to like look very closely, which I think is you slow people down. You have them consider things that are part of their everyday, part of the natural landscape, primarily, in a way that is really just like that little shift is pretty magical, I think. Okay. Maybe I'll just address this really quickly. This our title rock drawing because it's up on the screen. But this is a drawing that you made with water,
Mhm.
a spiral, of this very also an ancient form um, that has something to do with um, like discovery, um, meaning. But in any case, you should let it evaporate. So this is the sort of kind of you can start to see the connections, I think. All right, so let's see. I wanted to start by asking you about this idea of which you've talked about and which has been said about your work of privileging the downward gaze. So
Mhm.
staying close to the ground, the idea of the anti-monumental, and that's something that really, like I mentioned, I love seeing this, especially in this kind of context of the monumental works in steel that are surrounding it. So can you talk a little bit about this idea of sort of looking down, staying close to the ground?
Yeah, I mean, I think well, in my work in general, particularly in photographs, and in source imagery that I get for collaging too, there is this, I am attracted to to the gaze that is looking at the ground. Part of that is originally was really rethinking the general approach to landscape within the canon of photography and how it's like historically been documented. But it really, that was the initial kind of impulse and still is. But what I learned from that is that it's really a way to form a sense of intimacy with the place and also look at what would not be legible in a more like broad or far away, distant view. Um, it's also very like process related to me. So I walk everywhere. I'm from New York. I don't know how to drive. I'm like truly just a pedestrian. And so I'm always um, like, I don't know. I think about the way that I photograph. I'm just really thinking about what's in my range of sight at that moment. And so much of walking, especially if you're like on a trail or hiking or something, actually involves looking down and like watching where you're stepping and just, there's so much information on the ground that I feel like I want to pay attention to. For the Storm King project, that was a real challenge of just like, how do I stay true to that sort of part of my process of this sort of intimacy to place and wanting to, like you said, that I said, of being close to the ground. And just like, how do I actually do that in a sculptural form in such a that large space? Like a big part of the process too was, I think, folks at Storm King convincing me to go bigger because I was not taking into consideration, or I couldn't think at that scale. Like it was just really, it was a challenge for me. So I really was trying to think of how do I create that sense of intimacy in that space, and that goes to choosing to have a path carved out, like you mentioned. And right now the grasses are really tall, so you do feel sort of like insulated. And creating these smaller clusters that just kind of take you through a circle. But really that like, yeah, that gaze really comes from thinking about the canon, but then also thinking about just how I move through the world. And that's primarily through being on my feet. And for me, that's just a big part of my research because through walking, I'm always looking, and that's like the main point of photography is to be able to look and see um and I liked even hearing your description and saying how you were looking closely at the rocks. And I was imagining you like hovering over, like hunching, like literally having to get close. And so that was just nice to hear in terms of like your experience there.
Yes, I was really studying that. But there's another thing. We'll talk about the shadow.
Welcome to my world.
Shadows. I know. I like that. I like that. Looking at all the.
Yeah.
Um, this is why the work appeals to me so much. So we talked a little bit about this, but in terms of this is related question in terms of scale. So you're saying, I like that you told me initially, like Eric's like bigger, and you're like, okay. Um, and it's still very, I mean, it's a beautifully modest size. But scale, and let's talk about scale in various senses, because generally you work at a very small scale, um, both in the size, but and also just your kind of impact on the landscape that you're working with. So we saw before that the water, this drawing, disappears, and in other, and then the physical form of your work is often smaller. But can you talk about both the kind of why you work at that physical scale and then what how it's important to you to kind of keep your impact
Yeah.
light?
Yeah, or I try to, which was the thing with the, well, I'll talk about that. I'll save that for the end, or the end of my answer here. But I think that kind of what I said earlier about like thinking about what's within my range of sight, I think that my scale tends to match the distance of like my gaze generally. And so, that triptych of the three rocks, where's the water drawing. That was about how high I was standing. That was like literally my view. Like it's not like a cropped image. I'm not using a like zoom lens or anything like that. It's just kind of very close to my line of sight. And I for like um yeah, photographic and collage work, it's also I think about just wanting to be true to like my actual scale in amongst everything in a way and just thinking again back to the like historical canon of just like the uses for images of the American landscape as like um aids for conquering or for colonizing, and I feel strongly that I just like don't want to share that sort of view, um or I don't have anything to like add to that necessarily. And so I like to think of my work existing within this stack of other works that look like that, but it's like, well, maybe I'm just offering a different sort of perspective that's not that hasn't been like historically privileged in a way in terms of like how we think and understand place. And then with Storm King, I mean, I think in terms of you're talking about like my impact, like wanting to keep my impact light, I feel like that water drawing was the perfect example because it's like I was in a creek, I used my hand to make that drawing and I just photographed it as it disappeared. And that was like, and it was like I was never there. But with Storm King, that's like pretty much impossible because I'm putting a chemical on these rocks and I'm also carving into them. And so that was um similar to just like trying to go bigger. That was another sort of generative challenge for me in a sense of like, okay, how am I feeling coating these rocks like this? Does this feel, okay? The I do think that obviously the surface of the rock is forever altered, but it will fade. It will, like when the piece is done, we will put the rocks scattered throughout the landscape and they'll be flipped over, so it will just appear from the other, like the other side's not coated, so it'll just appear like a rock, or unaltered rock. And then with the carving into the surfaces, that was also interesting because while I'm there, I installed it. I was pretty much alone when I was doing that part, and it might sound like lame or something, but I felt really bad. I was like, I can't believe I'm doing this. I feel like I'm hurting the rock or something. But then I also thought about something that does, I do think about my work and informs my work. And I thought about petroglyphs and like thinking about those as early forms of like interpretation and readings and depictions of place and like community and storytelling. And it was like this is such a like we've been doing this forever, right? We've been like recording our interpretations through rock since like we've been here as a species. And so it all, it's a constant negotiation, but I think it goes back to wanting to be true to like what my scale is as like a single person on this planet. And I yeah, I think that's probably the best way I can answer that. But the Storm King project definitely like brought new challenges to that thinking that was very welcome, that was exciting to like work through.
Yeah, it's great that we're looking at this palm picture because I think that gesture of putting the palm, the one hand, it's that immediacy again, right? That one to one. And because
Yeah.
some of the other drawings, they're abstracted, they're small drawings of plants that would otherwise be.
You won't even be able to find all of them. I like there's some that I think aren't even as noticeable of the drawings, but and I do think that that one with the palm is funny because that's the rock that's been the most gone through the most changes, which has been kind of painful and exciting to watch.
Yeah, it has the biggest, like flattest surface,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
And it has the most sun. So, mhm.
Um, so this is a good segue into talking about this idea. And it's funny because before we talked about it earlier this last week, I hadn't really heard this, and maybe this is something that everybody has heard, but that this since then I've heard it twice. Like I went to another artist talk, and they're also talking about this idea of the rock and the fossil, the relationship. Can you tell everybody a little bit about this idea of the fossil and the first photograph and that connection?
Yeah. Yeah, that was something that I'm curious to know what talk you're at. I've been trying to throw this idea into the world for the last few years because it's something that I'm just thinking about, and it would be nice to think about it in conversation with others. But I kind of made a decision at a certain point to try to just kind of wrestling with my own feelings around the medium that I work in and the canon of landscape photography and just trying to figure out what is the perspective I'm really trying to come from, both in my work, but also just personally. And I stumbled across this idea of like thinking about plant fossils as being a form of photography. And then I thought, well, this must be like the first photograph if you want to kind of expand your idea of what a photograph is. And then, true story, I work at a big university and I went to, we have a geology museum on campus and I went over there and I met the guy who runs it and I like kind of was like, does this make sense to you? Like, what if like can the fossils be considered photography? And he was like, yeah, of course. And so I just thought, great, I'm gonna start using that. I was like, great, I was right. But what also the relationship I see to it with photography is just the actual process of like fossilization and the process of making a photograph have a lot of shared alchemy in which they're both things that happen in darkness. They happen through like exposure or like a sort of different sorts of pressure. So it's like there's a leaf on a rock, but then there's also the light hitting the negative in your camera or the light from an enlarger hitting like light sensitive paper to make a photographic print. And they just felt like the lightest touches that make this sort of permanent fixed like contact that you can then see and register. And this idea of like the fossil as the first photograph to me also released a lot of pressure in the sense of like um, I thought, well, I guess the land can like document itself. Like, and what does that mean if that's like the starting point. Um, and it just was very freeing, but also then I was like, well, what do I make a picture of? Like, how do I work with this? But I really just kind of adopted it as I'm not trying to make work about that necessarily, but I use that as a sort of guide for my process and just kind of like another, I think, acknowledgement of my scale. Um, and um, and like all of ours, like thinking about just like any um, landscape photographer, like big names you can think of or whatever. It's just like, well, what does it mean that like humans weren't the first people to like document a landscape? Um, and how does that like free the landscape as well? Um, and how does that make it not just about us all the time? Yeah, I just like thinking about photography existing before people were here.
Um, can we talk a little bit about this idea of mark making as kind of distinct from other, you say like everything's making a mark, but I mean like in within your work, this sort of idea of mark making, these, a petroglyph or a palm on the stone, or these like really delicate drawings you're making, and how, and the water drawing, this sort of um like quite literally making these marks, and how it works in your, how you consider it in your work. And then also connected to that is this idea of the shadow. So the downward gaze and looking down on these plates, these rock plates, with the sun like beating down on you. When I was there, the time of day I was, it was like really this, going back to the sundial analogy. Like I was very aware of my shadows as I was trying to sort of read the rock.
Mhm.
So maybe, and that's not the first time you've used, I don't know, maybe, okay, a couple questions. Were you thinking about people's shadows specifically in this context? And then also, you've used shadow in your other work as a form of mark making that's not actually physical, right? So could you talk a little bit about those things?
Yeah. I don't think I was thinking about people's shadows when I was making it, but it has something that's come up for me as well. So just spending time at the work and as I was making it, um, I'm, yeah, I think that, as someone whose primary medium is photography and collage, like I don't consider myself, I will make marks, I will make drawings, but the it's not necessarily like my form. So I think about mark making as a very like process oriented act in which I'm not necessarily trying to make a mark to depict or convey something specific. It's more like the mark making is me thinking or working my way through. Um, and I think that, as you brought up, the shadow is a kind of those are connected, right? Because it's the shadow is always moving. It's connected to an actual physical thing, right? And it's just a projection of it. And the works you're talking about where the shadow appears are a series of videos I've made called Walking Sticks that I'm still walking and I'm still making. And it's just recordings of the shadow of a dowsing rod, which is traditionally like a Y-shaped stick, a forked stick. And I'm usually just recording the shadow of that stick moving across like surface. And yeah, I think there is this uh his name is Jordan Stein. He runs a gallery in San Francisco called Cushion Works, and he had written something about like drawing set in time. And I think that that's what I'm interested in. This sort of malleability of that action and form. But the most representational thing I think I drew on those rocks is the hand, which is something that does show up in my work a lot anyway. It's just like something I can't quit, I guess. And so, um, I think that I haven't fully resolved my like impulse to do mark making. I just know that it's a form of translation of a particular like moment. And again, I'm not trying to draw a picture of anything necessarily, just a visualization of like process, which as I'm thinking even about a lot of your questions, a lot of them feel very much just about process and like the making of the work more so than what the final product comes to be. Because I find that, and I think a lot of artists probably feel this way, it's like the making is the most exciting part because it's like, wow, the thing is coming and it's happening. Um, and then once it's done, that reflection is like it's very different, right, from the like output. Um, I don't know if I answered your question. I kind of got lost in my.
No, you did.
Okay.
Beautifully. And so something else I wanted to ask you about, and these things are all intertwined, of course, is this idea of the analog. And you were saying you kind of have this joke with people where you're like, you're the tool, and it's like, it sounds self-effacing, but you mean you are the tool, right?
Yes.
And it's this, I mean, this maybe overlaps too much with the mark making, but do you know what I'm getting? Just maybe talk a little bit about this idea of the very analog, and that ties to the scale, to sort of the small scale, the immediacy of, we're seeing what you see, um,
Mhm.
but maybe the analog as it has to do with this kind of, I think we are talking about this about oh, just this little thing of humanity, but like humanness, right? And like what
Yeah.
that means, and maybe
Yeah.
vis-a-vis photography, if we're using the word analog.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that there's a lot there. I mean, I do primarily work in the dark room, which is considered analog, but I do think there's another like definition for that, which is thinking about just a ability to like rely on oneself and community to develop like information and skills together without some sort of like without some sort of modern technology. And it's to me it's like very personal and it's also political in the sense that of just like it's, yes, like you said, feeling a little bit closer to being human. I think, well, something I'll say is that a lot of and at Storm King too, but a lot of the kind of things I'm attracted to tend to be rocks and sticks. And I think that a part of that is that those were some of the first human tools. And I find that just like conceptually interesting to think about. That's not what I was thinking that drew me to them, but in reflection, I find that helpful and generative in my work. And I just think that, well, I'll go back even further of just like my first real body of work that like existed in a public way was made in 2019. And it's came from like a time that I spent looking into and learning survival skills, or some people call them ancestral skills. So things like building a fire from scratch, learning how to read the night sky. And what struck me from all of that was just that like the main tool was my body. Like that was it. And to me, that is very liberating and exciting and um, powerful. And so I think that that's why the analog feels important to me, both in the studio and out of the studio, of just this sort of self-reliance and community reliance. And I do think that those skills that I was studying too are like well, not like once you know them, you can always do them. Like I probably couldn't make a fire right now if you like dared me to, but I think that the knowledge is somehow stays innate. It's also something that has been generational knowledge and can get passed on and shared, but isn't something that can necessarily be like taken away, like, you know, like your phone or something. And so that to me is important. And in terms of studio, like when I'm in that's part of the reason why the darkroom process and even like, bringing that outside with cyanotyping is so important to me is that it feels closer to that sort of to me studying those ancestral skills. Like it's very innate and intuitive. It's not, I just don't have to rely on a certain type of technology. It's like we are the technology. And to me, that's just the most exciting thing. That said, it's not like I'm not like, my process isn't 100% analog. I do have to use digital things. I'm not like, um, as like off grid as I would like to be or something like that. But I just think that remembering that is important for my practice. And it's just something I try to stay rooted in. I mean, I think even the decision at Storm King to just try to find rocks around there instead of ordering the perfect rock, because you can order a rock. Like there's so many, but was nice to just use what was there and not have to go beyond that, which to me feels related to the analog thing. But
Um, so many questions. Let's see. Can we talk a little bit about, we were talking about, um, well, so this really deep blue black indigo of the cyanotype. It's also in the text about the work that it's this recall, sort of reference to blackness. And then we were talking about sort of blackness, the American landscape, and this idea of belonging.
mhm.
Do you maybe take us through
Yeah.
that idea?
Yes. Well, again, I feel like I always have to go back in time to like contextualize things, but I will say like an initial impulse of mine within my work was to just try to reconcile my relationship with like the American outdoors and um, think about how these were spaces that I really enjoyed being in, but also felt some sense of discomfort in, and just wanting to sort through that. And that mostly led me again to thinking ancestrally and thinking about the variety of experiences that generations before me in my lineage have like probably, or that I can assume had in these sorts of um, outdoor spaces. And that's both thinking about it as a site of refuge if people are migrating or fleeing, you know, the South. And also finding that as like a space of danger of like, you know, what happens if you're found. And so that was kind of like the root of it, of just trying to like sort that through. But I do think that that's in a way that's very personal to me. I think that there was another way that I look at it that's more that's less personal and more kind of a collective, and thinking about people in general, and a larger history to our relationship to the outdoors, and thinking about how I think collectively we behave as if we don't belong here, or if like this isn't our home. And I think that in my work, I've been thinking about that as this like conflict of belonging, of like, what does it mean to reconcile with whether or not you belong in a space, or whether or not you have like, what's your agency there? And I think that, collectively, like I said, I feel like we behave as a species as if we don't belong here, in a sense that we are destroying our planet and like the one home that we have. And I also think on another level within America, there's this grappling with this fact that we came to a place, all of us in different ways, through mass conflict and violence. And then, like, why would we feel a sense of belonging? Why would we behave as if we belong here? Um, and I'm just interested in that conflict. And I have more to say about this, which I feel like Marina and I have talked before. So it's like I'm thinking more about your question about grief, and I don't know if you want to like introduce that, but it feels very connected. Um, do you want to say something about that?
Yeah. Oh, just yes, that there's just, if you just think about the what's happening to the work, and I think what what spurred me
Hmm?
initially to think about this was that you literally expressed grief over the work disappearing so quickly, more quickly than you had anticipated, even though you knew that this was going to happen. But on top of that, there's, of course, there's the dark, that blue black color. There's sort of this, if you look at the figures now, thinking about the figures, they're like in sort of like in you can easily think of them as in mourning or something like that, right?
Mm.
And there is this loss of the image, and then you're thinking about land, and you're thinking about these figures, and they become the figures in the land, and clustered in groups but separate. So these ideas of belonging and communing and what gets lost and
Yeah.
who can be here. All these questions come up in the landscape, and so grief is something that was like is there,
Yeah.
and I just wonder.
Yeah, I think that what you just said, my grief over the loss of the image, but I do think it's like, yes, the image that I made, but then in that loss, there's this like new image that is made through just the process of the sun hitting the surface of the rock that's been treated with the cyanotype. Like all that rusting is like the new image, for me, not one that I made. And so that's like the grief over the thing that I did. And I think that's again the sort of like human-centric way of thinking about it. But yeah, I like thinking that it just occurred to just, I think it's healthy to think that there's new images that are being produced on those surfaces and that that's like, okay. And that's part of it. But yeah, the grief thing is real. I think that, my interest in landscape in general initially came from a place of grief, which I feel like I've explained in terms of like a more personal ancestral level. And I you know, just going back to just saying again, thinking collectively, um, that I guess, I don't know, I guess it's just like not a surprise that this is like how, that our collective relationship to place is so troubled. And that it is hard to kind of like make ourselves small, and not even make ourselves small, but accept that we are small. Um, and not think about the fact that, we are in debt to this place. And I don't mean like America. Like I don't mean like in debt to like a place or system or government. I just mean like the land itself. And I think a lot about reciprocity, which is this Indigenous scholar Robin Wall Kimmerer writes about a lot. And reciprocity to me is a way of dealing with grief. And so I think this sort of like, okay, well, how do I practice that in my work? I'm not saying I am. I don't know. These are just questions that I have. Um, but I think that reciprocity requires like a giving and receiving, and it's just something I think that we collectively refuse to give. I feel like maybe I'm getting off track here because now I'm just going on to a different sort of like my worldview rant, but I think that, the more that we destroy, the less there is to receive, and the more we have to act on the giving, and that seems like a difficult thing to do collectively in terms of like our relationship to place and lots of other things. But yeah, I think that, you know, it's just something to work through, and I think that that's probably sums up my practice. It's just I'm just like working through it all, and I don't that's why I like talking to other people like you, and for the Q&A about it, because I think that's helping the like working through and not necessarily um we figure it out together, I guess. I went off.
Oh no, actually, it's a great lead into this closing. I mean, Joshua, we have a little bit of time for one sort of more idea before we jump into Q&A. Is this thing that we ended up talking a lot about before, Dionne, which is, and we're talking a little bit about here, and I started with this idea of this kind of like something divine, something,
Uh-huh.
but in the natural sense, right? In the sort of like uh, like made of the world kind of sense, this like miraculous thing that we don't have any control over. It exists and it's like nature is beautiful and perfect idea. But that does sort of we start using these words like I use these words like miraculous and divine, and there's some kind of connection to mysticism, certainly some ancient wisdom, some like intuition, like maybe intuition is something
Mhm.
spiritual, right? As opposed to religious, but it gets kind of all muddled. So I just wonder from you, we talked about this a lot in circles, but about this idea of spirituality, faith, the cosmic, mysticism. We mentioned dowsing rods a couple of times. This is a leitmotif in your work, these forked sticks that you use to find water, right? And it's this like ultimate, I don't know, it is mysticism, it is hope, it's um, nature telling you something, or your body having to communicate with nature in such a way that you can find water without the use of other tools, right? So, anyway, my question is, what do you think about
Those themes.
spirituality
Yeah.
in your work?
Yeah. Well, I'll just say one quick thing about the dowsing rods first is that, yeah, my initial thought when I started working with them was, I was living in California. I moved there during a major drought, and I was just like, does this work? Is this like a real thing? Like, and I am interested in mysticism and all those things just kind of generally, but I wanted to see, and it was, to my surprise, like things happened. Like it was interesting experience. And so but it feels very akin to creativity in general, which I think creativity is totally faith-based. Like there's no, like I don't know any artist who may be on some level, like you don't know what you're doing all the time. You're just acting. And so I think or again, you're using it to figure something out, but it's not like you're not starting from the answer and working backwards, it's like you're working towards something. And I think that, some of these words you use, like spirituality and mysticism and stuff, are associated with some of my work. There's like a surface level way in which I think it happens, in which it's just like you said, we can't, like people see landscape or nature and it's inherently in their minds like a spiritual thing. On the other hand, I do think that, um, a lot of my work is about intuition in a way, and just like even the water drawing, or like I made a video that was related to that, of like string and a spiral floating on the surface of water, which I'm not going out there knowing I'm going to do that necessarily. I just am in a space for a while and then I figure out something happens. um and so I think that I don't really, and you know this already, I don't really have a way to address these themes because I do also want to resist intellectualizing them, or even the process, because to me, it's so much about process, like your question. And I think if I were to overrun it in my head, it would kind of lose its spirit. And I also think that it would like kill a part of my practice if I like went too deep into it. It's like I have to like protect that. And that's not just like generally, it's like these are things I think about, but I don't really want to. I'm more interested in like um other interpretations that revolve around that, but for hearing from other people, because to me it's like that's not really even, I don't know. Like I said, I feel like creativity is totally faith-based, and I don't, you got to draw the line somewhere. But I do think that intuition, I think, is the word I'm most comfortable with. And it's like something that is just true, I think, of any creative process practice. And I think what I like to do is just display the intuition, and it's just, and I know that there's meaning in that. And I have my own ideas of those meaning, and we've talked about what those meanings are already. But when it gets to like this higher meaning, I don't know. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for contending with that difficult question. But it is. There's like this is what it's so what I started out saying is so um just endlessly engrossing about the work is that it's that going back to mark making, it's that thing of like putting my
Hmm.
palm in the air, but of like this this direct mark, this direct imprint.
Yeah. And like
It's the meaning.
I still have an impulse to say I was
That's
here. You know,
it.
it's
Yeah,
not
yeah,
like that goes away, even though I'm saying all the stuff I'm saying. It's just like,
exactly. Exactly. No,
yeah.
I'm here and now
Oh,
you're here
yeah.
where I was
Yeah.
looking at the thing that I touched, and it's yeah, it's all this immediacy um that's so beautiful, and to bring meaning to it in some way that's very hard to grasp is fully, and to really intellectualize fully is a beautiful thing. um I think, I don't know, where are we? Are we looking at,
That feels good.
yeah? Yeah, there we
I
go.
think it feels great.
Alrighty, we'll move into the audience Q&A now. Thank you so much, Marina and Dionne, for that conversation and dialogue. If anyone from the audience has a question for Dionne, there is a link in the chat where you can submit your question. I have a couple here ready to go. So Dionne, one member of the audience asks, or says rather, there's something at play in your work about the temporal and the archived, the long term and the immediate. And how has that perceived dichotomy influenced this installation at Storm King?
Yeah, I think that that goes, well, at least archive part, I think that that goes back to me thinking about fossilization and thinking about trying to rethink the history of photography and actually like expand the photographic archive. So like include other to include other ideas of what a photograph can be. Something Marina and I have also talked about when you mentioned temporal is just kind of this idea of photography as a sort of ephemeral or fleeting thing that happens. And I think we both agreed that that's not truly like real, like how, it's part of it. But in the end, it becomes something fixed. So it's like the image on the negative is fixed, the image on the paper is fixed. And yeah, and they live throughout time. So I think, for Storm King in particular, I was definitely interested in that relationship. Maybe it's also about testing my own sort of um uh in hindsight, I feel like I'm now looking at my own the stability of my own impact. And that goes back to how the rocks have been weathered, or particularly talking about that north-facing rock with the handprint. And to me, that's just like exciting um, information to receive back from the work around like, you know, okay, that's interesting. Now what? Like, how do I deal with those feelings? Like, it's Marina and I were talking about, and then like, what is that? Then what new challenges that bring to like process? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you so much for that answer. Our next question comes from an audience member. They ask, can you talk about working alone, like installing at Storm King or the rock drawings or darkroom, and where other folks come into your practice? Photographers who are artists have a complicated relationship to how other people are part of their process.
Yeah, that's true. Um, that's a really good question. Um, Well, working alone takes different. I do primarily work alone. Some of my earliest work when I was in California involved me like taking Ubers out to random trailheads and getting off. And because again, I don't drive, so it was just like I was truly alone in like, kind of more remote areas. And so I think it can feel very vulnerable, which I think is again, like a generous place to work from. And so I do welcome that, even if there's discomfort in it. At Storm King, it's not like I mean, it would be crazy for me to say I did that alone because, oh my God, like the staff at Storm King is amazing and they have, so much knowledge and, you know, there's a crew, right? I couldn't move those rocks. Like people moved those rocks with forklifts and like, made that happen. So I did not do that alone. I also received help in like a lot of emotional support, but also just like support of just through Adela and Eric, the two curators who worked on it, in terms of just like, okay, I need to apply this chemistry, or something happened. Can you reapply this chemistry? Whatever. But I did do the bulk of like chemistry application and then the actual carving into the rocks alone. And that to me is a way of like, it's similar to being in the dark room where I'll often like to print things that I don't, you know, have a purpose for it yet, but to me, that's the way I think through the work. It's like a time I get to spend with the work, and there's like a dialogue that happens. And so being out at Storm King, um, I installed it, I think, in March, and it was not warm. It was like I was exhausted by the end of the day. I was bent over these rocks in crazy positions and just like, you know, didn't wear a mask the first time I used a Dremel and just inhaled a bunch of rock dust and was not in good shape for a while, just things like that but to me, those were all ways of figuring out what the work was about. And the process is all just informing all of that. So um, I do work alone a lot, and I like it like that. I think, I like the dialogue that comes after. Like I like being in community in like thinking, um, thinking and talking.
Thank you so much for that. We have a couple more questions, but I'm also curious about the specific site with at Storm King, and
Yeah.
how that sort of site got determined, or whether or not you selected that particular site at Storm
Mhm. Yeah, that's a really good question. It was a back and forth negotiation. I knew I wanted somewhere flat to lay these rocks down, and I knew I wanted you to pretty much like not necessarily see the work until you were kind of right up on it, which now, because the grass is taller, I think it has more of that effect. Um, so if you've been to Storm King, there's not a ton of like completely flat areas. And there's, again, going back to all the knowledge that's there, that from people who work there, it's like there are places that look flat, but in reality, they're not until you walk it or you get up to so even that kind of like, it's interesting when you think about perception of space and place. But yeah, I wasn't like I gotta be by Michael. I wasn't like I gotta be by the Sarah or anything like that. I just wanted somewhere flat and accessible. But I spent time, I had spent time there just walking the property and looking and just trying to respond to different places. This was before I even really knew what I was going to do fully. So I really think I was responding to being there and just responding to the landscape itself.
We have one more question from the audience. What will happen to the rocks at Storm King after November 10th?
They will be returned to undisclosed locations on the property and flipped over so that the cyanotype side is facing down. Oh, I should say one thing that not just, but just I realized I should plug this, which is that I will be screening a video at Storm King November before it comes down. I want to say it's November 8th or 9th. It's a Saturday. Um, I just want to feel like I should say that. Just want people to know that that's another kind of element to the work that's coming to fruition. Because I do work in video a lot, and I was thinking this didn't come from a conversation, but I am thinking about, what it means to make what it means in the history of like artists who make land works, and just there's a history of documentation that happens, and primarily also thinking about Nancy Holt's film Sun Tunnels, about that piece. And so it's just another form of like the work coming to be. And so people want to go to that, they can.
Thank you so much, Dion, for those answers and for sharing that event information with us all. Today, we are going to be ending our event with a little reading. So I'll pass the virtual mic back to you, Dionne.
Right. Yes, I just need to, I wasn't totally prepared. Sorry. I'm going to read a poem um, by this poet, Wendell Berry. Um, Here it is. It's called The Morning News, and it's by Wendell Berry. To moralize the state, they drag out a man and bind his hands and darken his eyes with a black rag to be free of the light in them, and tie him to a post and kill him. And I am sickened by the complicity in my race. To kill in hot savagery like a beast is understandable. It is forgivable and curable. But to kill by design, deliberately, without wrath, that is the sullen labor that perfects hell. The serpent is gentle compared to man. It is man, the inventor of cold violence, death as waste, who has made himself lonely among the creatures and set himself aside, so that he cannot work in the sun with hope, or sit at peace in the shade of any tree. It's the morning news drives sleep out of the head at night. Uselessness and horror hold the eyes open to the dark. Weary, we lie awake in the agony of the old giving birth to the new, without assurance to the new will be better. I look at my son, whose eyes are like a young god's, they are so open to the world. I look at my sloping fields now turning green with the young grass of April. What must I do to go free? I think I must put on a deathlier knowledge and prepare to die rather than enter into the design of man's hate. I will purge my mind of the airy claims of church and state. I will serve the earth and not pretend my life could better serve. I'll read that again. I will serve the earth and not pretend my life could better serve. Another morning comes with its strange cure. The earth is news. The river floods and the spring is cold. My heart goes on, faithful to a mystery in a cloud, and the summer's garden continues its descent through me toward the ground.
Thank you so much, Dionne, for that reading. And thank you both, Dionne and Marina, for this delightful conversation. Thank you, Petra from Petra Bibeau, for their support in preparing for today's event. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art and Tiger Foundation for sponsoring our NSE program and making these daily conversations possible, and for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. The Rail has been free and independent for 25 years. A donation directly supports our writers, production staff, and operations. Support our work through the link in the chat. The Rail's October issue goes live tomorrow, so please join us for the issue launch party on Friday, October 3rd from 6 to 8 p.m. at Paula Cooper Gallery. The link to the event is now also in the chat. And if you're available tomorrow, please join us at 1 p.m. for a conversation with Kay Gabriel and Mackenzie Wark on the event of the release of Gabriel's new book, Perverts. This event will conclude with a reading by Rainer Diana Hamilton. And as is Rail tradition, now you can turn on your microphone and say goodbye as you leave.
Thank you, thank you,
Bye,
thank you.
everyone. Thank
Thank you so
you.
much.
Bye.
Thank you, Dion.
Dion and Marina.
Thank you,
Thank
Diana.
you so
Thank
much.
you.
I'm so excited to go see the show.
Hi, Alex. Hi,
Can't wait
Marcus.
to see the
Hi,
show.
Eric.
That's right. Go see the show. Congratulations. Thank you.
Thanks.
Woo!